War is hell. At least that's what they say. Humans built weapons designed to cause suffering. Tiny bomblets that scatter into hundreds of explosions. Traps that cripple people long after the wars are over. Even machines that can wipe out the entire world. Eventually, the world had to say enough. Some weapons were just too cruel, too destructive, and too dangerous to keep. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're uncovering the weapons so devastating they have been banned. Humans have been trying to put rules on warfare since the first rock was thrown, but history shows they usually only applied until someone found it convenient to ignore them. For the most part, war had no limits. Armies used whatever brutal tools they could muster, from fire and poison to siege weapons that starved entire cities. Winning mattered more than rules. That changed after the Industrial Age, when warfare became so destructive that nations began setting boundaries. Treaties like the Hague and Geneva Conventions tried to impose order, laying down rules to protect civilians and restrict the worst methods of fighting. Eventually, nations drew a line between acceptable and unacceptable carnage. Modern rules of war rest on 4 principles. Weapons must distinguish soldiers from civilians. They shouldn't keep killing long after the fighting stops. They can't inflict unnecessary suffering, and they must remain controllable once unleashed. Sounds reasonable enough? Yet plenty of weapons break all 4, starting with cluster munitions. If you've never heard of them, imagine a deadly piñata that gets dropped from a plane and then bursts open mid-air. It scatters hundreds of smaller bomblets across an area the size of several football fields. That's a cluster bomb in a nutshell. Each little bomblet is designed to kill anything within about 50 feet. That means one cluster munition can turn anywhere in a 15-acre patch into a very bad place to be standing. The concept actually started with Germany's SD-2 butterfly bomb during World War II. Painted deceptively bright yellow, they opened in mid-air and drifted slowly to the ground, wings outstretched like toys. Inside, they carried enough explosives to maim rather than kill. Wounded soldiers drained far more resources than dead ones. And most disturbing of all, they were deliberately made attractive to curious children after bombing raids. Even by Nazi standards, that is twisted. But the real cluster bombs didn't make an appearance until the Cold War, when both superpowers began stockpiling millions of them. Vietnam became the testing ground from hell. During Operation Rolling Thunder, the U.S. dropped millions of tons of ordnance, more than all of World War II combined. And that's when the world learned the ugly truth about cluster munitions. They're the deadly gifts that keep on giving. Between 10 and 40% of cluster bomblets don't explode on impact, they just lie there, inert and waiting. A third of Laos is still contaminated with unexploded ordnance more than 50 years after the war ended. Farmers are afraid to till their own fields. Kids have been killed picking up what they thought were tennis balls or toys, not realizing that they were holding live explosives. The horror stories eventually got so bad that someone had to do something. That's when Ireland decided to lead the charge for a global ban on cluster bombs. In 2008, they spearheaded the Convention on Cluster Munitions through what diplomats called the Oslo process. 107 countries signed on, agreeing that cluster munitions were too nasty for civilized warfare. Meanwhile, the world's biggest military powers, the United States, Russia, and China, essentially said thanks, but we'll happily keep our death-dealing confetti cannons. The US even argued that cluster munitions were more utilitarian than alternatives. But despite the global ban and decades of outrage, cluster bombs are back. Today, they scar the battlefields of Ukraine, used by Russia and more controversially supplied by the United States to Ukrainian forces. It has created this uncomfortable moral dilemma where Ukraine argues they need these weapons to survive. Meanwhile, humanitarian groups point out that Ukrainian children will be finding unexploded bomblets for decades to come. What about other banned weapons? Landmines are the buried cousins of cluster munitions. These weapons can outlast wars, lying in silence for decades until a single unsuspecting step sets them off. Here's what made landmines the perfect defensive weapon, at least from a coldly practical military standpoint. They cost as little as $3 to manufacture, but up to $1,000 to safely remove. You can deploy them quickly, they require zero maintenance, and they create massive logistical and psychological problems. Entire regions become no-go zones just because people thought there might be mines there. Cambodia became the poster child for this horror. Between the various factions fighting there, the Khmer Rouge, Vietnamese forces, government troops, an estimated 4 to 6 million mines were planted across the country. Afghanistan wasn't far behind with 40 years of continuous mining, by Soviets, Mujahideen, Taliban, and coalition forces. These countries became real-life examples of what happens when you turn warfare into a very deadly scavenger hunt. The human cost is both staggering and heartbreaking. Thousands of people are killed or injured by landmines every year, the vast majority of them civilians. It's the cruelest irony. Weapons that keep fighting long after the wars are over. The turning point in the landmine ethics debate came when Princess Diana walked through a cleared minefield in Angola in 1997, wearing body armor and a face shield. That single image, the world's most famous woman navigating a landscape filled with invisible weapons, captured global attention like nothing else could. Suddenly everyone understood that this was a full-blown humanitarian crisis. But the real architect of change was Jody Williams, a Vermont schoolteacher turned activist. She coordinated the international campaign to ban landmines, a coalition of over 1,000 NGOs in 60 countries. Williams and her team created unstoppable momentum by borrowing the playbook from their anti-Vietnam protests as students, essentially bypassing traditional diplomatic channels entirely. Instead of waiting for governments to lead, they organized grassroots pressure campaigns that made it politically impossible for politicians to ignore the landmine crisis. This citizen-powered movement caught the attention of Canada's former Foreign Minister, Lloyd Axworthy, who saw an opportunity for change. The 1997 Ottawa Treaty was born from this partnership between civil society and progressive governments, with the process deliberately excluding the major military powers. In just 14 months, over 100 countries signed on to ban anti-personnel landmines. Williams won the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts, proving that sometimes a school teacher with a cause can achieve what armies of diplomats can't. Today, 165 states have ratified or acceded to the treaty. But guess who didn't sign? It was the usual suspects: the United States, Russia, India, Israel, and China. Their argument once again was that landmines have legitimate military utility, especially in places like the Korean DMZ, where 2 million mines help maintain a 70-year-old armistice. It's the ultimate catch-22. The countries most likely to use landmines are precisely the ones that won't give them up. The good news is that mine production has virtually stopped among signatory countries. Over 55 million stockpiled mines have now been destroyed, which is a big step. The bad news? At current demining rates, places like Cambodia will need another century to be completely clear. And in one of diplomacy's enduring mysteries, Tonga never signed the treaty either, which raises the question, what exactly is the Pacific Island Kingdom planning to do with anti-personnel landmines? It's now time to talk about another deadly weapon that violates just about every principle of civilized warfare: poison gas. The history of industrialized chemical warfare stretches back to April 22, 1915, near Ypres, Belgium. German troops opened nearly 6,000 cylinders of chlorine gas and watched a 20-foot-tall greenish-yellow cloud drift toward Allied trenches. Meanwhile, German machine gunners opened fire to keep the Allied soldiers pinned down in their trenches. Dirty, but effective. In short order, well over 5,000 soldiers were dead or dying. War had officially become a horror movie where the real enemy was invisible, odorless, and literally stole your last breath. From then on, World War I became a large-scale chemistry experiment, with both sides frantically developing new and improved ways to gas each other. The progression went from chlorine to phosgene to mustard gas, each iteration more horrifying than the last. By the war's end, chemical weapons had caused 1.3 million casualties and 90,000 deaths. In an almost unbelievable twist of fate, Adolf Hitler, the man who pioneered modern genocide and ordered the gassing of millions, decided that chemical weapons were too horrific for the battlefields of World War II. Despite manufacturing huge stockpiles of chemical weapons, he never deployed them with the Wehrmacht. Historians still debate why. Maybe it traced back to his own gas attack near Ypres in October 1918. Or perhaps it was fear of Allied retaliation, with their even greater stockpiles. In the end, we'll never know. Hitler's taboo lasted until the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, when Saddam Hussein brought chemical weapons back with a vengeance. The 1988 Halabja massacre saw upward of 5,000 Kurdish civilians killed in a single day. Some families were found dead in their homes, still holding each other. Then in 1995, a Japanese apocalyptic cult called Aum Shinrikyo brought chemical warfare to the Tokyo subway system during rush hour. They unleashed sarin gas on 3 separate lines of the metro, proving that chemical weapons had evolved from military tools to terrorist weapons. That remains the deadliest terrorist incident in Japan by modern standards, killing 14, injuring 50, and causing temporary vision loss for thousands more. More recently, we've seen Syrian government forces using chlorine barrel bombs against civilians, and Russian-deployed Novichok nerve agents for diplomatic assassinations on British soil. Chemical weapons effectively evolved seamlessly from battlefields to terror attacks and state-sponsored hits. Surprisingly, the international response actually worked pretty well. The 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention has been signed by 197 countries, almost everyone except Egypt, North Korea, and South Sudan. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has overseen the verified destruction of over 98% of declared stockpiles, including the dramatic at-sea destruction of Syrian chemical weapons aboard a U.S. Navy ship. It's actually one of the few arms control treaties that mostly worked, probably because nobody really wanted to admit that they had chemical weapons anyway. Turns out that when your weapon of choice is associated with both the grimiest of World War I horror stories and genocidal dictators, it is not great for your international reputation. Chemical weapons might be the coward's arsenal, but where does that leave the deadliest weapons of all? Nukes. The nuclear age kicked off with physicist Robert Oppenheimer watching the first atomic test and immediately quoting Hindu scripture about becoming death itself. 3 weeks later, 2 Japanese cities learned what 16,000 tons of TNT delivered in a single flash could do. The world suddenly had a weapon that could end civilization, and the obvious response was to build 70,000 more of them. Cold War logic was beautifully insane. The strategy was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD for short. The idea is simple. Try to kill us and we'll kill literally everyone else, including ourselves, 100 times over. The terrifying part is how close we have come to accidentally ending the world. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet commander Vasily Arkhipov refused to approve the launch of a nuclear torpedo, a single decision that stopped the world from sliding into nuclear war. In 1983, Stanislav Petrov saved humanity by deciding his stunning computer warnings of incoming American missiles were probably glitches. We literally survived the Cold War because a few Russian officers had good instincts about technology failures and diplomatic feints. Meanwhile, the exclusive nuclear club kept growing despite everyone's efforts to keep it small. India and Pakistan, 2 neighbors with a serious grudge history, both got nukes, creating the world's most dangerous bloc party. North Korea managed to go from mass starvation to nuclear weapons in about 20 years. We've reduced global stockpiles from 70,000 to about 13,000 warheads, which sounds impressive until you realize it's still enough overkill to vaporize the planet several times over. In 2017, non-nuclear countries finally got fed up and banned nuclear weapons entirely. All the nuclear powers boycotted the negotiations. What did we learn from all this? Well, for one, that international law is like creating house rules for a game where half of the players don't agree to play by them at all. Frustratingly, for treaty signatories, there is no global police force, no international jail. Sovereignty means any country can simply flip the table and just walk away whenever it chooses. Yet somehow those bans often work anyway. Chemical weapons are 98% destroyed, landmine production is virtually stopped among treaty signatories, and even holdout nations often comply to avoid becoming international pariahs. The catch is that the most dangerous weapons remain with the countries most likely to use them, which isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. We have banned more weapon types than any generation in history while simultaneously becoming the first species capable of accidentally ending itself. The real weapon of mass destruction isn't chemical, nuclear, or biological. It is arguably the unpredictable combination of human ingenuity and human nature. We can ban the tools, but can we master ourselves? The answer to that test truly matters, because if humanity gets it wrong, there are no retakes. Modern weapons can be so destructive they are banned worldwide, but ancient history had its own terrifying inventions. Watch insane ancient superweapons you never knew actually existed to see just how deadly the past could be, or click on this video instead.